What would you do if you found out, on your wedding day, that the family you were marrying into never saw you as equal? Not because of what you did, but because of who you are. This is the story of a bride who stood tall when others tried to put her down, and taught a powerful lesson without raising her voice. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because that encourages us to bring you more powerful stories like this. The air was thick with joy and anticipation inside the bridal suite of the Bellamy estate. Sunlight filtered through gauzy white curtains, softening the edges of the room like a painting. Classical music floated gently from a vintage speaker on the dresser. The scent of fresh roses, white, blush, and ivory, hung in the air like a promise. Everything was perfect, or at least it should have been. Sierra James stood motionless in front of the tall antique mirror, her honey-brown skin radiant against the ivory lace of her wedding gown. The intricate beading caught the sunlight like tiny stars. Her natural curls were swept into a low chignon, and small pearl pins sparkled like quiet defiance tucked into her hair. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Behind her, her best friend and maid of honor, Tasha, adjusted a flower in Sierra's hair with delicate fingers. "You ready to make history, girl?" she whispered, her voice a mix of affection and nerves. Sierra gave a small smile, her lips barely curving. "I'm ready to marry Nathan." But even as she said it, a knot twisted in her stomach. Not because of Nathan, but because of them. Nathan's parents, Arthur and Eleanor Wexley, had always been courteous, civil, polite, but never warm, and certainly never welcoming. During the engagement, they'd kept their distance, always cloaked in civility, but Sierra had felt every slight, every backhanded compliment, every avoidance of eye contact when conversations turned personal. And she knew why. She was black. No amount of pedigree, no Ivy League credentials, no polished accent or pristine upbringing could change what they saw when they looked at her. Not a daughter-in-law, not family, but an outsider. Her hand tightened slightly at her side. The lace of her gown pricked her palm. Across the room, Tasha caught the shift in Sierra's posture and offered her a glass of water. "Hey, look at me," she said gently. "You've got this. They don't define your worth. You hear me?" Sierra looked up, her eyes deep and defiant, clouded only slightly with nerves. "I hear you," she said, but somewhere inside, doubt had already begun to bloom. The hallway outside the bridal suite echoed with muted voices and the clinking of champagne flutes. Guests had begun to arrive, their heels tapping along the marble floors like distant thunder. Sierra stepped out with Tasha beside her, the train of her dress sweeping the ground like a royal decree. She didn't have to look far to spot Eleanor Wexley, standing near a floral archway in a navy blue sheath dress. Eleanor exuded the kind of wealth that never had to speak loudly. Her posture was perfect, her pearl necklace flawless, her expression unreadable. Nathan's father, Arthur, stood beside her with a stiff smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sierra approached with polite grace, but Eleanor didn't smile. Instead, she gave her a once-over that was more appraisal than affection. It lingered too long on the curls tucked into Sierra's bun, on the depth of her skin tone. "Sierra," Eleanor said, her voice as crisp as chilled wine, "you look elegant." It was a sentence carefully constructed to avoid warmth. "Thank you," Sierra replied, keeping her tone neutral. "You look lovely as well." Arthur nodded. "Big day." That was it. "No, we're happy to welcome you." "No, you're part of the family now." Just facts. There was a pause, and Sierra felt it, the sharp contrast between what should be and what was. Tasha cleared her throat subtly, as if to fill the space with something that didn't hurt. Then Eleanor stepped slightly closer. "I just hope Nathan knows what he's getting into," she said softly, her smile never touching her eyes. Sierra blinked. "Excuse me?" Eleanor's voice remained calm, but her words dripped with precision. "Marriage is a lifelong commitment, and it's not built on sentiment or defiance. It's built on foundation, similar values, similar traditions." Sierra's heart thumped. "Nathan and I share the same values." Eleanor's expression didn't change. Do you? The air chilled around them. Arthur looked away, pretending to check his watch. Sierra opened her mouth, but no words came. Not because she didn't have any, but because none would be heard. Not today. Not by them. Tasha stepped in, looping her arm through Sierra's. We need to get back for photos, she said firmly. Eleanor gave a tight smile and turned away. As they walked off, Sierra whispered under her breath, "They'll never see me." Tasha looked at her. "No," she said. "They refuse to, but that's their failure. Not yours." But Sierra wasn't sure. She'd faced 1,000 versions of this moment in boardrooms, universities, fundraisers. Any space where she had to fight to be more than just a checkbox. But this was supposed to be sacred. And the fact that it wasn't, it hurt more than she'd expected. The chapel was breathtaking. Sunlight streamed through tall stained glass windows, scattering golden light across the guests seated in hushed anticipation. White orchids curled delicately around the altar, and a string quartet played softly from the loft above. Sierra waited just behind the double doors. Her heart pounded like a drum, echoing in her ears. Tasha gave her hand a final squeeze before stepping back into the wings. Then the music shifted. The doors opened. Everyone stood. Sierra stepped into the aisle, bouquet in hand, veil trailing behind her. She smiled, not just for the guests but for herself. This was the moment she had dreamed of since childhood. Only she had never imagined how heavy her joy would feel under so many judging eyes. She walked slowly, purposefully. Most guests smiled politely. A few leaned in and whispered. But she saw them, Eleanor and Arthur, seated in the front pew. Eleanor's lips were pursed. Arthur's hands were clasped tightly. Neither smiled. Her gaze searched for Nathan. There he was at the altar, nervous, handsome, and smiling, really smiling when he saw her. That smile gave her strength. When she reached him, he took her hand and whispered, "You're stunning." She managed a soft laugh. "Don't you forget it." The officiant began, his voice reverent and warm. Words of love, commitment, partnership. But as the vows began, the tension in the air thickened like a storm cloud. "I, Nathan, take you, Sierra," he began, voice steady. Sierra listened, her eyes never leaving his. But in the corner of her vision, she saw Eleanor shift in her seat. It was barely a movement, but it spoke volumes. A tightening of her jaw, a stiff exhale. And then, during Sierra's vows, came the first audible crack. As Sierra said, "And I promise to stand by your side in every battle, every victory, and every storm." A guest, Eleanor's cousin, an older woman in a lavender suit, let out a faint scoff, just loud enough. Sierra paused for a beat, her smile wavering. The officiant glanced up. Nathan squeezed her hand, grounding her. She pressed on, voice strong again. "And I promise to love not just the man you are, but the man you strive to be, every day." They exchanged rings. The ceremony ended with a kiss, and the guests stood to applaud. But the clapping was uneven, polite in places, hollow in others. Sierra and Nathan turned to face the crowd, now officially husband and wife. She caught Eleanor's eyes. Still no smile, but something worse, a look of warning, like this wasn't over. The reception glowed with soft, golden light. Fairy lights strung across the tall hedges, gentle jazz wafting through the air, and guests swaying beneath an open night sky. But despite the beauty, Sierra felt the tension woven into the silk of her dress. The eyes still watching her, weighing her. She and Nathan danced alone for a while, wrapped in their own rhythm. But all too soon, someone tapped a fork to glass. The toasts had begun. Nathan's best man shared a story that made everyone laugh. Sierra's cousin told a touching memory about late-night talks and shared prayers. Then came Eleanor Langston. She rose slowly from her seat, dressed immaculately in silver satin, her expression smooth as porcelain. "Thank you all for being here," she began, lifting her champagne flute. "It's a joy to celebrate my son's wedding day. And such a lovely ceremony, wasn't it?" Nods around the room. "When Nathan first told us about Sierra, I admit, I was surprised," she said. turning slightly to face the bride. Not because he wasn't ready, but because, well, Sierra was different. Sierra didn't flinch, but her smile faded. She didn't grow up around us. She comes from a world we don't fully know. A world, perhaps, that doesn't quite know us either. The air grew still. But, Eleanor continued, marriage is about compromise, and we learn to open our hearts to new possibilities. She raised her glass. To new beginnings. The applause was hesitant. Some clapped politely. Nathan started to stand, fire in his eyes, but Sierra reached for his wrist. She stood instead. And silence fell again. She lifted her glass with a calm so poised, it commanded the room without raising her voice. I appreciate your toast, Eleanor, she said. But I need to say something now. Not just as a bride, but as a woman who's had to smile through more than most people will ever understand. Her voice held steady, even as her heart pounded. When I walked down that aisle today, I didn't just carry flowers. I carried history. I carried every whispered comment about how I must have gotten lucky. Every smile that didn't reach the eyes. Every moment I was told without words that I didn't belong in certain rooms. Especially rooms like this. Guests began to shift. Some lowered their eyes. Some looked at her more clearly than before. I know what it feels like to be invited in, and still feel like a stranger, and I've learned to make peace with it. But I will not make silence my tradition. She turned, fully facing Eleanor and Arthur now. I didn't marry Nathan to be accepted by this family. I married him because he sees me, completely, because he knows I carry not only my own name, but the names of women who had to fight just to be heard, just to be loved without apology. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. Her voice grew warmer, fuller. I may not have grown up in country clubs or gone to boarding schools, but I grew up with love. I grew up with faith. I grew up knowing how to fight with grace. She paused, then continued softly. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm offering you an invitation to know me, to respect me, and if you truly want to honor your son's heart, then maybe an apology is a good place to begin. The room was breathless. Nathan stood beside her now, proudly, silently. Arthur was the first to speak. I owe you an apology, Sierra, he said, his voice gravelly but real. We misjudged you. That's on us. Then all eyes turned to Eleanor. She stood, quietly, her facade cracking at the edges. Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered her glass. I was wrong, she said, her voice thin. You deserve better than what I gave. Sierra nodded, not as a victor, but as a woman reclaiming her peace. The guests erupted into full applause, not polite, but earned. Later that night, as the music swelled again and guests returned to dancing, Sierra stood at the edge of the dance floor, gazing at the stars. Nathan approached her from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, he whispered. She leaned into him. I wasn't just speaking for me, she said softly. I was speaking for every black woman who ever walked into a room where she wasn't wanted, and stayed anyway. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when Sierra received the invitation. It came with a note, handwritten in a careful, apologetic script. Dear Sierra, we owe you more than words can say. Nathan has shared with me the changes you've helped bring to our family business, and I must admit, I underestimated your brilliance. I'd like to formally invite you to dinner tomorrow evening at our home. A chance for us to celebrate all you've done, not just for our company, but for our family. I look forward to making amends and expressing my gratitude in person. Arthur Wexley. Sierra read the letter twice, a mixture of disbelief and caution tugging at her. This was an unexpected turn. A dinner, a recognition, a chance for them to finally see her not as an outsider, but as an equal. But a part of her still wondered if it was enough. Could they truly change? Or was this a gesture to clear their conscience? Nathan could sense her hesitation when she showed him the note. He stood behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. I think it's genuine, Sierra, he said softly. My father, he's not the easiest man to admit when he's wrong. but something about this feels real. He's proud of you. I can see it. Sierra sighed, her hands gripping the letter. I just don't want it to be performative, you know? I need to see if this is truly a change in them, not just a way to save face. Nathan kissed the top of her head. We'll go together and we'll see. If they're sincere, we'll know. If not, well, we'll leave. She nodded. I'll go for you, Nathan. But I need to see real effort, not just words. The next evening, they arrived at the Wexley estate, the same lavish home where their wedding had taken place. This time, however, it felt different. It wasn't a celebration, but a reconciliation. As they entered the grand dining room, Sierra was struck by the stark contrast between the grandiosity of the house and the warmth she felt now in her chest. There was no pomp, no unnecessary fanfare. Just a table set for a quiet, intimate evening. Arthur Wexley stood when they entered, his face marked with an unfamiliar vulnerability. He extended a hand, and Sierra hesitated for only a moment before shaking it. Sierra, Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. I have a lot to make up for, but first I want to say thank you. Your contributions to the company have been invaluable. You've pushed us forward in ways I never expected. And for that, I'm truly grateful. Sierra could feel the sincerity in his words, but there was still a cautiousness that made her wonder if it was too late to rebuild the trust. She smiled, a genuine one this time. It was never about proving anything to you or anyone else, Arthur, she said, meeting his gaze. It was about doing what was right for everyone involved. This company deserved more, and I believe in its potential. Eleanor stood nearby, silent at first, then spoke, her voice filled with a sense of deep regret. I'm sorry, Sierra, truly, for everything. I thought I was protecting Nathan, but in the process I hurt you, and for that I will always be sorry. Tasha, who had come along for support, stepped forward and hugged her. That's what matters. Apologies are the first step. Now we rebuild. Dinner was a quiet affair, but as the evening went on, the atmosphere shifted. There was a sense of vulnerability in the room, but also of possibility, of new beginnings. The meal itself was simple yet elegant, prepared by a chef who was more focused on the quality of the ingredients than any extravagant presentation. The conversation was light at first. Talk of the weather, the economy, the recent expansion of the business, but gradually it deepened, touching on the changes within the company that Sierra had been instrumental in bringing about. Her efforts had resulted in a surge of growth and innovation for the Wexley family business, particularly in ways that were more inclusive and forward-thinking. What had once been a conservative, outdated corporation now had new energy, thanks to Sierra's vision. She had introduced diversity training for executives, advocated for a more equitable leadership structure, and pushed the company to embrace sustainable practices. These changes hadn't just improved the company's bottom line, they'd improved its reputation, and they had made it a model for others in the industry. Nathan's father, Arthur, had noticed the shift. Do you remember when I told you I didn't think you'd fit into our world, Sierra? Arthur said, breaking the silence. I was wrong. You fit in better than anyone I could have imagined. You've made this company, and our family better, and for that we owe you more than just an apology. We owe you our thanks. Sierra took a deep breath, looking around the room. The apology felt genuine, but it also felt like a turning point. She wasn't here to change their views entirely, but she was beginning to see that they were willing to meet her halfway. And then, just as she thought the night would settle into a quiet, reflective close, Arthur stood and raised his glass. Let's make this night a celebration, he said, his voice clear and firm. A celebration of what we've built, together, and of the woman who helped us see things differently. Sierra's heart swelled as she watched Nathan smile at her, pride shining in his eyes. She had come into this family uncertain, unsure of where her place was. But tonight, she felt like she had truly found it. She wasn't just part of Nathan's world anymore. She had helped reshape it. Arthur signaled to the pianist, and soon, the sound of a soft waltz filled the room. To her surprise, Eleanor stepped forward first, extending her hand toward Sierra. I'd like to start with a dance, Eleanor said softly, her voice filled with a quiet apology. Will you join me? Sierra hesitated for just a moment, then placed her hand in Eleanor's. It wasn't a grand gesture, but there was a tenderness to it, a recognition that they could move past their differences. They glided across the floor, slowly at first, then with more confidence as the music played on. Sierra's gaze lifted to the other guests, and she noticed something. The room had transformed from a tense gathering to a warm reunion. Members of the Wexley family, once stiff, cold, and judgmental, were now interacting with a newfound warmth, eager to make up for lost time. One by one, they joined the dance floor not just because it was expected, but because they wanted to. The atmosphere was no longer one of separation, but of unity. Sierra smiled to herself, her heart light. She could see that this was the first of many new beginnings. As she danced with Nathan, the weight of everything that had been said and done lifted, replaced by something far stronger. Love, acceptance, and the understanding that they all had a lot to learn from each other. And when the music finally slowed, Nathan pulled her close, his voice full of emotion. You've changed everything, Sierra. No, she whispered back. We did it together, but I'm just getting started. Sierra took a deep breath, then looked around the room, now full of warm laughter and dancing. The night was still young, and the future was wide open. This is just the beginning, she thought, and with that, a quiet resolve settled in her heart. It was more than just acceptance she had earned. It was the chance to redefine what it meant to be part of a family, to break down the walls of prejudice that had held them apart. But as much as this night felt like a victory, it was also a reminder. Change didn't happen by waiting for it. It happened when people made the choice to challenge the status quo, to show up, and to rewrite the narrative. And Sierra had done exactly that. Now it's your turn. Change doesn't come from silence. Whether it's in our families, our communities, or our workplaces, when we choose to challenge prejudice, we break down barriers. What walls will you tear down today?